I've been making Hollow Knight lore videos for a few years now, looking into any and all aspects of the game and coming up with speculations about them. Even when certain things primarily exist for the purpose of game mechanics, I find it fun to look into the lore implications. However, I find that there is one phenomenon in the world of Hollow Knight that I, for the longest time, couldn't come up with an in-universe explanation for, that being floating platforms. Some platforms, which are not part of a bigger landmass within the game's world, are supported from the top or the bottom. For certain others, one could infer that they are attached to the near or far wall of the room as they would appear on the Z-axis. Most of the game's action takes place in the midground, with silhouettes of objects that the knight can walk behind indicating the presence of a foreground, and parallax scrolling giving the impression of a distant background. For some platforms, though, the background seems too far away for those platforms to realistically be attached to them, or the platforms have foreground objects or plant growth on them which indicate that they are not attached to the near wall either. It's pretty obvious why floating platforms exist as part of any game. They're a means of navigating the game's world either vertically or horizontally. In most cases, their placement doesn't make sense with the laws of physics or gravity, but they don't really need to. It's like how games will feature the playable character having an ability to respawn when they die. It's because they would realistically have a limit of how much they can be injured before it destroys them, and the game isn't meant to end upon death, outside of things like Hollow Knight's Steel Soul mode, of course, instead giving the player more chances to continue progression without starting over. As for Hollow Knight having a respawn mechanic in its default mode, I've come up with an explanation for that in previous videos of mine. The knight is fated to save Hallownest, and so they will have as many chances as are necessary until they accomplish this. When most other aspects of a game do indicate the presence of gravity and related physical properties, the floating platforms then inevitably stand out. However, many game worlds have one or both of two things that could explain them: magic or technology. In Hollow Knight's case, it would more likely be the former. The one explanation I could really come up with for Hallownest having floating platforms is that it was made possible by the Pale King's worm abilities during his construction of the kingdom. When playing the game as the knight, floating platforms are a means of navigating the world, and that could also be what the Pale King intended them for with the citizens of Hallownest. The Pale King is, of course, dead by the time the game's events take place, but we learn from the Godseeker that his afterglow remains and is the reason the kingdom's bugs still have their intelligence, so the after effects of the king's presence in the world of Hallownest could be keeping other things his power established intact too. I know I said in the title of this video that the floating platforms are the one thing in Hollow Knight that in-game lore couldn't explain, and yet I just now provided an explanation. To be fair, that particular game mechanic stumped me for a long time, and the one speculation that I was able to come up with feels like more of a reach than other lore tie-ins that I've discussed in the past. I also acknowledge that not everything in Hollow Knight needs deciphering like this, but I still find it fun and engaging, so I'm always going to do it anyway, even subconsciously. With Silksong, there's a possibility that all of Farloom's floating platforms are held up with silk suspended from above, but other than that, I suppose we'll just have to find out. What do you think of my speculations? How would you explain floating platforms in Hollow Knight if you think they warrant explanation at all? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. I've got a whole backlog of other Hollow Knight lore videos for you to check out if you haven't already, as well as plenty of other videos on all kinds of media. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.